The blood trickling down Vivian Keller's face mixed with her tears as she stumbled through the dense woods outside Provo, Utah, in 1878, desperately fleeing the man who had promised to love and cherish her, but instead had become her tormentor. The full moon illuminated her path as she pushed deeper into the forest, her cotton dress torn and mudded from her desperate escape. Her golden hair, usually neatly pinned, now hung in tangled disarray around her bruised face. Each step sent pain shooting through her ankle, but she couldn't stop not when she knew Victor would come after her. 3 years of marriage had taught Vivian that her husband's rage knew no bounds. She had endured his cruelty, believing his promises that he would change, that it would get better. But tonight had been different. The look in his eyes had told her he might not stop until she was dead. The snap of a twig nearby made her freeze. Had he found her already? Vivian pressed herself against a large pine tree, holding her breath as she listened for footsteps. Her heart pounded so loudly in her chest she was certain it would give her away. "Hello?" A deep voice called out, definitely not Victor's. "Is someone there?" Vivian remained silent, weighing her options. If she ran, she might make noise and be discovered. If she stayed, whoever was out there might find her anyway. The crunch of boots on fallen leaves grew closer. "I ain't gonna hurt you," the voice said. "Saw someone running through these woods from my camp. Figured you might be in trouble." A tall figure emerged from between the trees, and Vivian stifled a gasp. In the moonlight, she could make out the silhouette of a man broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy by the looks of him. "Madam," he called softly, "you don't need to be afraid." Despite his reassuring words, Vivian's body tensed, ready to flee again. She had trusted a man once before, and it had led to years of pain and suffering. The stranger moved closer, and the moonlight revealed his face strong-jawed, with kind eyes that seemed to shine even in the darkness. He carried a rifle, but it hung loosely at his side, not pointed at her. "You're hurt," he said, noticing the blood on her face. He took a step forward, then stopped when she flinched. "My name's Xavier Young. I've got a camp not far from here. You look like you could use some help." Vivian hesitated. Behind her lay miles of wilderness. Ahead was a stranger who might be her only chance of survival. "He'll kill me if he finds me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Xavier's expression hardened. "Who will, my husband?" The word tasted bitter in her mouth. Understanding crossed Xavier's face. Without another word, he moved toward her slowly, like one might approach a wounded animal. When he was close enough, he extended his hand. "Come with me," he said softly. "I'll keep watch." Those 4 simple words, spoken with such conviction, broke something inside Vivian. The dam of emotions she had built over years of abuse cracked, and tears flowed freely down her cheeks. Still, she didn't move. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. Xavier lowered his rifle to the ground as a gesture of good faith. "You don't, but I give you my word as a man that I mean you no harm." He paused, then added, "And I won't let anyone else harm you either." Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was something in his eyes that spoke of honesty, but Vivian found herself reaching for his outstretched hand. "My name is Vivian," she said, her voice steadier now. "Vivian Keller." "Miss Vivian," he nodded, helping her away from the tree. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Xavier led her through the forest, occasionally stopping to listen for pursuit. His camp was hidden in a small clearing, just a simple bedroll beside a modest fire, with a horse tethered nearby. "It ain't much," Xavier said apologetically, "but the fire's warm and I've got some food and clean water." Vivian sank down beside the fire, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. Xavier handed her a canteen and then busied himself with tending to the flames, giving her space to collect herself. "Thank you," she said after taking a long drink. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Xavier nodded, his face serious in the firelight. "You don't need to talk about it if you don't want to, but I reckon a man who drives his wife into the wilderness in the middle of the night ain't much of a husband." "No," Vivian agreed quietly. "He's not." She touched her swollen cheek, wincing at the tenderness. Xavier noticed and reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a handkerchief. He dipped it into a pot of water warming by the fire. "May I?" he asked, holding up the damp cloth. Vivian nodded, and he gently began cleaning the blood from her face. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man with such rough, weathered hands. "How'd you end up out here all alone?" Vivian asked, wanting to break the silence that had fallen between them. "I'm a drover," Xavier explained, "taking a herd north to Wyoming. Stopped in Provo to resupply and decided to camp out here rather than pay for a room in town." He smiled slightly. "Never did care much for town beds when there's good open sky above." "You're a long way from your herd," Vivian observed. "Left them with my partner for the night." "Needed some time to think." He finished cleaning her face and sat back on his heels. "What about you? You from Provo?" Vivian shook her head. "We moved here 6 months ago from St. Louis. Victor, my husband, has a position at the bank." "Respectable position," Xavier commented, his tone neutral. "Yes, everyone thinks so," Vivian said bitterly. "Everyone thinks he's a fine, upstanding man. No one sees what happens behind closed doors." Xavier was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've known men like that, wear one face for the world and another for their families." He stoked the fire with a stick. "It ain't right." "No," Vivian agreed. "It's not." They fell into silence again, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Vivian felt her eyelids growing heavy, the events of the night catching up with her. "You should rest," Xavier said, noticing her exhaustion. "I'll keep watch." Vivian hesitated. "What if he comes looking for me?" Xavier's expression hardened. "Then I'll deal with him." He reached for his rifle and set it across his lap. "Get some sleep, Miss Vivian. You're safe here." Despite her fear, Vivian believed him. There was something about Xavier Young that inspired trust. She settled onto the bedroll he offered her, wrapping herself in the blanket that smelled of horses and pine. "Thank you," she whispered, already drifting toward sleep. "You don't need to thank me," Xavier replied softly. "Just rest now." As Vivian surrendered to exhaustion, her last conscious thought was that, for the first time in years, she felt safe. The sound of birds singing woke Vivian the following morning. For a moment, disoriented, she forgot where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. Xavier was still there, sitting on a log by the now smoldering fire. He looked tired but alert, his rifle still across his lap. When he saw she was awake, he offered a small smile. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept well." "You stayed awake all night?" Vivian asked, guilt washing over her. Xavier shrugged. "Wouldn't be much of a watchman if I'd fallen asleep on duty." Vivian pushed her tangled hair from her face, suddenly aware of how she must look. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Xavier said, standing and stretching his tall frame. "Coffee," he gestured to a pot sitting near the fire's edge. Vivian nodded gratefully, and he poured her a tin cup of the strong brew. As she sipped it, she assessed her situation in the harsh light of day. She had run away from her husband with nothing but the clothes on her back. She had no money, no possessions, nowhere to go. "What will you do now?" Xavier asked, as if reading her thoughts. Vivian stared into her coffee. "I don't know, I can't go back to him." Her hand unconsciously touched her bruised cheek. "But I have nowhere else to go." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I'm heading north with my herd, Wyoming territory. It's a hard journey, but—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You'd be welcome to travel with us, at least until you figure out your next steps." Vivian looked up at him, surprised by the offer. "You do that? For a stranger?" Xavier's eyes met hers. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Miss Vivian." She considered his offer. Going north with Xavier meant leaving everything behind: her few possessions, her identity as Mrs. Keller, the life she had known. But staying meant risking Victor finding her, and she knew what would happen then. "Your partner won't mind?" she asked. Xavier smiled. "Zachary's a good man. He won't mind another hand around camp, especially one that might cook better than we do." The idea of traveling with a group of cowboys was scandalous by any measure of society, but Vivian found herself considering it seriously. What other choice did she have? "I'll need to get some things from town," she said finally. "Clothes, at least." Xavier nodded. "We can ride in together. You can tell me where to go and I'll get what you need." He glanced at her face. "Might be best if you're not seen just yet." Vivian touched her bruised cheek again, understanding his meaning. Victor would be looking for her, and Provo wasn't large enough to hide in. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Xavier waved off her gratitude. "Let's get moving before it gets too late in the day. We need to meet up with the herd by sundown." They broke camp efficiently, Xavier showing Vivian how to roll his bedding and pack his supplies. When everything was ready, he helped her onto his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty, then mounted behind her. The ride toward Provo was tense for Vivian. Every approaching rider made her heart race with fear that it might be Victor. Xavier seemed to sense her anxiety and kept to the less traveled paths. "Where would your husband be at this time of day?" he asked as they neared the outskirts of town. "The bank," Vivian replied. "He wouldn't leave his post even to look for me. His reputation matters too much to him." Xavier nodded. "That works in our favor. Now, where can I get what you need?" Vivian directed him to a small general store owned by an elderly couple she had befriended. "Mrs. Peterson knows me. She's kind. She'll help without asking too many questions." Xavier tied Rusty to a hitching post a block from the store. "Wait here," he said. "I'll be back as quick as I can." Vivian watched him walk away, anxiety creeping back in as she was left alone. She pulled her tattered shawl closer around her face, trying to hide her bruises from passing townsfolk. True to his word, Xavier returned quickly, carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Got everything on your list," he said, securing the package to his saddlebag. "Mrs. Peterson sends her regards. Seemed to understand the situation without me saying much." Vivian felt a rush of gratitude for the old shopkeeper's discretion. "Did anyone ask about me?" Xavier's expression darkened slightly. "The sheriff was in the store when I arrived. Overheard him telling Mrs. Peterson that Mr. Keller is looking for his wife, who wandered off in a confused state last night." Vivian felt sick. "He's making it sound like I'm not right in the head." "It's a common tactic," Xavier said grimly. "Makes people less likely to help you if they think you're unstable." He mounted behind her again. "We should move quickly now. The herd's camped about 10 miles north of here." They rode out of town, sticking to back roads and trails. Xavier kept a vigilant eye out for pursuers, but they encountered no one. As they put more distance between themselves and Provo, Vivian felt the knot of tension in her chest begin to loosen. "Tell me about your herd," she said, wanting to focus on something other than her fear. 500 head of Hereford cattle," Xavier replied, pride evident in his voice. "Finest in the territory, taking them to a ranch near Laramie." "Is that what you do, drive cattle, among other things?" "I ranch some when I'm not on the trail. Have a small spread in Colorado, nothing fancy, but it's mine." There was satisfaction in his voice when he spoke of his land. "You live there alone?" Vivian asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Xavier didn't seem to mind. "Just me and a few hands during busy seasons. Never found the right woman to share it with. He paused. What about you? Any children with your husband? Vivian shook her head, grateful he couldn't see her face. No, Victor wanted children, but it never happened. She didn't add that she had come to see this as a blessing. Bringing a child into that house would have been cruel. They rode in comfortable silence after that, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Vivian into a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The Wyoming Territory was a world away from her life in Provo and even further from St. Louis. Maybe there, she could start fresh, become someone new. As the sun began its descent, they crested a hill, and Vivian caught sight of the cattle herd spread across the valley below. The lowing of the animals carried on the wind, along with the shouts of cowboys keeping the herd together. A chuck wagon was set up near a small stream with several men gathered around it. Home, sweet home, Xavier said, a smile in his voice. For the next few weeks, anyway. As they approached the camp, a man detached himself from the group and rode out to meet them. He was shorter than Xavier, with a red beard and friendly eyes that widened with surprise when he saw Vivian. You old dog," the man called out. "Didn't tell me you were bringing company back from town." Xavier dismounted and helped Vivian down. "Zachary, this is Miss Vivian. She'll be traveling with us for a while." His tone suggested there would be a fuller explanation later in private. Zachary, to his credit, simply tipped his hat to Vivian. "Madam, welcome to the most uncomfortable journey you're ever likely to take." Despite everything, Vivian found herself smiling. "Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Any friend of X's is welcome here," Zachary said, then turned to Xavier. "Herd's restless today. Might be a storm coming." Xavier nodded, looking at the distant horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "We'll need to keep a close watch tonight." He turned to Vivian. "Let me show you where you can change and rest." He led her to the chuck wagon, where an older man was stirring something in a large pot. "Cookie, this is Miss Vivian. She'll be traveling with us for a while." The cook, a grizzled man with a scar running down one cheek, gave her a once-over, his eyes lingering on her bruised face. His expression softened. "Got some stew on if you're hungry, miss, and there's a spot behind the wagon where you can have some privacy to change." Vivian thanked him and took the bundle Xavier had purchased for her. Behind the wagon, she opened it to find a practical riding skirt, 2 simple blouses, undergarments, and a warm jacket. There was also a wide-brimmed hat, perfect for shielding her face from both the sun and curious eyes. Mrs. Peterson had thought of everything. She changed quickly, grateful to be out of her torn, dirty dress. The new clothes were plain but sturdy, made for travel rather than fashion. When she emerged, she felt more herself than she had in years. Xavier was waiting for her, holding a plate of stew. "Feeling better, much," Vivian said, accepting the food gratefully. "Thank you for everything." They sat together on a log by the fire, eating in companionable silence. The other cowboys kept a respectful distance, though Vivian could feel their curious glances. It wasn't every day a woman joined a cattle drive. "They're good men," Xavier said, noticing her awareness of their attention. "But they'll keep their distance unless invited otherwise." Vivian nodded, relieved. She wasn't ready for questions or conversation beyond Xavier and perhaps Zachary. The events of the past 24 hours were still too raw. As night fell, the camp settled into routine. The cowboys took turns keeping watch over the herd, while others gathered around the fire, sharing stories and the occasional song. Xavier stayed close to Vivian, introducing her to the men as they approached but never leaving her to fend for herself. When it was time to sleep, Xavier showed her to a small tent he had set up for her. "It's not much, but it'll keep the rain off if that storm comes in." "Where will you sleep?" Vivian asked, realizing she might have taken his shelter. "Don't worry about me," Xavier said with a smile. "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count." As if on cue, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. Xavier glanced at the sky. "Though tonight might not be the best night for it. Get some rest, Miss Vivian. We move out at first light." He started to walk away, but Vivian called after him. "Xavier." When he turned, she said simply, "Thank you for finding me in those woods." In the flickering firelight, his expression was impossible to read. "Sometimes paths cross for a reason, Miss Vivian. Good night." That night, as rain pattered against the canvas of her tent, Vivian thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been a banker's wife, trapped in a nightmare of abuse and fear. Now she was traveling with a herd of cattle, headed for Wyoming territory with a group of cowboys she barely knew. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in years, Vivian Keller felt free. The storm that had threatened the previous evening broke fully during the night, turning the ground to mud by morning. Despite the conditions, the cattle drive prepared to move on. Vivian emerged from her tent to find the camp already bustling with activity. Xavier approached, leading a small bay mare. "Borrowed her from Zachary for you," he explained. "She's gentle, good for someone who might not have ridden much." Vivian stroked the horse's velvet nose. "I used to ride quite well, actually, before I was married." Victor had deemed horseback riding unladylike and had sold her mare shortly after their wedding. "Well then," Xavier said with a smile, "you and Daisy here should get along just fine." With his help, Vivian mounted the mare, adjusting her riding skirt for comfort. The other cowboys were already moving the herd, their shouts and whistles directing the cattle northward. "Stay close to the chuck wagon," Xavier advised. "I need to help with the herd, but I'll check on you when I can." Vivian nodded, understanding that he had responsibilities beyond looking after her. As Xavier rode off to join the other cowboys, she felt a twinge of anxiety at being left alone, but pushed it aside. These men had no reason to harm her, and she couldn't expect Xavier to be her constant protector. The day passed slowly, the cattle making ponderous progress through the muddy terrain. Vivian rode alongside the chuck wagon, occasionally helping Cookie prepare meals when they stopped for brief rests. The old cook was taciturn at first, but gradually warmed to her presence, especially when she showed she wasn't afraid of hard work. By mid-afternoon, the skies had cleared, and the spring sun beat down on them, beginning to dry the sodden earth. Xavier rode back to check on her, his hat pushed back on his head, revealing sun-darkened skin and those thoughtful eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "Holding up all right?" he asked. Vivian nodded. "I'm fine. The riding is coming back to me." Xavier studied her for a moment. "You're different today," he observed. "More yourself, I think." Vivian considered this. She did feel different, stronger, more certain. "Maybe I am," she agreed. "It helps to be moving forward even if I don't know where I'm going." "Sometimes the journey matters more than the destination," Xavier said, then grinned. "Or so my pa used to say, though usually he was lost when he said it." Vivian laughed, surprised by how good it felt. When was the last time she had truly laughed? Victor had never approved of such unseemly displays. "Your father sounds like a wise man," she said. "He was," Xavier replied, a shadow crossing his face. "Died when I was 18, left me the Colorado property and not much else, but he taught me everything important." "Like what?" Vivian asked, genuinely curious. Xavier thought for a moment. "How to read the land, how to treat a horse, that a man's word is his bond," he paused, "and that no man worthy of the name raises his hand to a woman or child." The last words hung between them, unaddressed but acknowledged. Xavier didn't press her for details about her marriage, and Vivian was grateful. Some wounds were still too fresh to probe. "I should get back to the herd," Xavier said finally. "We'll make camp early tonight to let the ground dry some more." As he rode away, Vivian found herself watching him longer than necessary, noting the easy way he sat his horse, the confidence in his movements. Xavier Young was nothing like Victor Keller, and the contrast was becoming more apparent with each passing hour. That evening, as promised, they made camp while the sun was still well above the horizon. The cowboys worked efficiently, settling the cattle and establishing the night's watch rotation. Vivian helped Cookie with the evening meal, learning the rhythm of feeding a dozen hungry men on the trail. After dinner, several of the men produced instruments: a harmonica, a fiddle, even a small banjo. Music filled the camp, lifting spirits after the challenging day. Zachary approached Vivian, extending his hand. "Care to dance, Miss Vivian? Promise I won't step on your toes. Too much." Vivian hesitated, glancing at Xavier, who was watching from across the fire. He gave her an encouraging nod. "Thank you, Mr. Zachary," she said, taking his hand. "I'd be delighted." They danced a simple two-step to a lively tune, Zachary keeping a respectful distance while still guiding her smoothly. It had been years since Vivian had danced. Victor considered it frivolous, and she found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of movement and music. When the song ended, Zachary bowed dramatically, making Vivian laugh again. Before she could return to her seat, another cowboy asked for a dance, and then another. They were all unfailingly polite, treating her with a courtesy that surprised her after years of Victor's controlling behavior. Finally, Xavier approached as a slower tune began. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. Vivian took it, noticing the rough calluses on his palm, so different from her husband's smooth, banker's hands. Xavier drew her into the dance, keeping a proper distance between them, yet somehow the dance felt more intimate than those with the other cowboys. "You're fitting in well," Xavier observed as they moved around the fire. "The men like you." "They're kind," Vivian replied. "I wasn't sure what to expect, traveling with a group of cowboys." Xavier smiled. "Cowboys get a bad reputation, but most are just hard-working men trying to make their way." He twirled her gently. "Besides, a lady's presence tends to improve manners considerably." The music ended, and they stopped dancing, though neither immediately stepped away. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Then Xavier stepped back, releasing her hand. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Vivian." Before she could respond, a shout came from the perimeter of the camp. "Riders coming in." The festive atmosphere vanished instantly. Xavier's hand went to his pistol as he moved protectively closer to Vivian. "Get to your tent," he said quietly. "Stay there until I come for you." Heart racing, Vivian hurried to her small tent, fear gripping her. Had Victor found her already? She peered through a small opening in the canvas, watching as 3 riders approached the camp. The newcomers stopped at the edge of the firelight, hands visible to show they meant no harm. They weren't lawmen by their dress, just travelers. Vivian felt her panic subside slightly. She watched as Xavier and Zachary conversed with the strangers, their postures gradually relaxing. After several minutes, the visitors were invited to dismount and join the camp for coffee. Despite Xavier's instructions, Vivian's curiosity got the better of her. She emerged from the tent and made her way cautiously toward the fire. Xavier spotted her immediately, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "Miss Vivian, these gentlemen are heading to California. Just stopped for some company and news of the trail ahead." The 3 strangers tipped their hats to her, surprise evident on their faces at finding a woman in the cow camp. "Madam," the eldest of them greeted her. Didn't mean to alarm the camp. We've been riding alone for days and saw your fire. Vivian nodded politely, but stayed close to Xavier's side. The travelers shared news from the east, nothing about a banker searching for his missing wife, to her relief, and asked about conditions ahead on the trail. As the conversation continued, Vivian gradually relaxed. These men posed no threat. They were simply passing through, as countless others did on the western trails. After an hour, the visitors thanked them for the hospitality and rode out, continuing their journey by moonlight. As the camp settled back into its routine, Xavier approached Vivian. "I told you to stay in your tent," he said, his voice low. "I know," Vivian acknowledged, "but I couldn't just hide and wonder what was happening." Xavier studied her face. "You were afraid they might be looking for you." It wasn't a question, but Vivian nodded anyway. "Victor has connections. And money can buy a lot of help. We're putting more distance between you and Provo every day," Xavier reminded her. "And we're not exactly easy to track with the herd stirring up dust for miles." Vivian sighed. "I know. I just can't shake the feeling that I'll never truly be free of him." Xavier's expression softened. "It takes time to feel safe again after living in fear, but you will." He glanced around the camp. "You should get some rest. We've got another long day tomorrow." As Vivian prepared for sleep, she reflected on Xavier's words. Would she ever truly feel safe again? The 3 years with Victor had taught her that danger could wear a respectable face, that promises could be broken as easily as they were made. Trusting again, anyone seemed impossible. And yet, she realized as she drifted toward sleep, she had already begun to trust Xavier Young, a man she had known for barely 2 days. The days on the trail fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, help with breakfast, break camp, ride all day, make camp again, sleep beneath the vast western sky. Vivian's hands grew calloused, her skin tanned by the relentless sun despite the hat Xavier had bought her. She learned the ways of the trail, how to read the weather, how to handle her mare in difficult terrain, how to help with the 1,000 tasks that kept the cattle drive moving northward. The cowboys, initially awkward around her, gradually accepted her presence. She wasn't a burden, as some might have expected, but pulled her weight in camp, helping Cookie with meals and taking on whatever tasks she could manage. A week into the journey, they made camp near a small stream that cut through the arid landscape. While the men tended the cattle, Vivian eyed the flowing water longingly. It had been days since she'd had more than a quick wash from a basin. "Go ahead," Xavier said, noticing her gaze. "Take some time for yourself. We'll keep the men away from that bend in the creek." He pointed to a spot where the stream curved behind a stand of cottonwoods, offering privacy. Gratefully, Vivian gathered her soap and clean clothes and made her way to the secluded spot. The water was cold but refreshing as she waded in, still wearing her undergarments for modesty. She washed quickly, aware of her vulnerability, but relishing the simple pleasure of being clean again. As she dried off and changed, she heard a horse approaching. Fear spiked through her until Xavier's voice called out, "Miss Vivian, everything all right?" "Yes," she called back. "Just finishing up." "Take your time," he replied. "I'm just keeping watch nearby." The knowledge that he was guarding her privacy rather than intruding on it touched Vivian deeply. Such respect had been rare in her life with Victor, who had considered her body his property to examine or use as he pleased. When she returned to camp, hair still damp but feeling renewed, Xavier was waiting with a cup of hot coffee. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much," she replied, accepting the drink. "Thank you for standing guard." Xavier shrugged as if it was nothing worth mentioning. "Figured you deserved some peace and privacy." They sat together by the fire, watching as the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink. The other cowboys were occupied with the herd or their own tasks, leaving them in a rare moment of solitude. "Can I ask you something?" Vivian said after a while. "If it's not too personal," Xavier nodded. "Ask away. You mentioned your father, but not your mother. Is she?" "She died when I was young," Xavier said, his voice soft with old grief. "Fever took her. I barely remember her, just fragments her singing, the smell of her hair when she held me." He stared into the fire. Pa never remarried, said he couldn't replace her. Vivian felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry, it must have been hard growing up without her." "Pa did his best," Xavier said. "And the land was a good teacher too." He turned to her. "What about you, your family?" Vivian sighed. "My father was a merchant in St. Louis, died 5 years ago. My mother followed a year later. Grief, the doctor said, though I think it was more that she didn't know how to live without him." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "They loved each other very much." "And they arranged your marriage to Keller?" Xavier asked, a hint of judgment in his tone. "No," Vivian shook her head. "I met Victor after they died. I was alone managing my father's shop and he seemed kind, stable." She gave a bitter laugh. "He courted me properly, was the perfect gentleman. It wasn't until after the wedding that I saw who he really was." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Men like that are skilled at hiding their true nature until they have what they want." "Yes," Vivian agreed softly. "And by then it was too late. A wife belongs to her husband after all." "That's what everyone believes." "Not everyone," Xavier said firmly. "A marriage should be a partnership, not ownership." Vivian looked at him with surprise. "That's a progressive view for a cowboy." Xavier smiled slightly. "Maybe I'm a progressive cowboy." His expression grew serious again. "No one deserves to live in fear, Vivian, especially not from someone who promised to cherish them." It was the first time he had used her name without the formal miss, and somehow it felt significant, a small but meaningful shift in their relationship. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing he would understand all she was thanking him for. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell fully over the camp. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the plains. Vivian shivered, not from cold but from the realization of how far she had come from the life she had known. "You should get some sleep," Xavier said, noticing her fatigue. "We cross more difficult terrain tomorrow." As she rose to go to her tent, Vivian paused. "Xavier." When he looked up at her, she said, "I don't regret it, running away. Even with all the uncertainty ahead, I don't regret it." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Good night, Vivian." "Good night, Xavier." In her tent, lying on the simple bedroll, Vivian thought about their conversation. For the first time, she had spoken openly about her marriage, about the abuse she had endured. And Xavier had listened without judgment, without the disbelief or dismissal she had feared. It was a small step, perhaps, but an important one. In the darkness of her tent, Vivian allowed herself to acknowledge something she had been feeling for days. She was beginning to care for Xavier Young, not just as her rescuer, but as a man. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The terrain grew more challenging as they pushed northward, crossing into Wyoming territory 2 weeks after leaving Provo. The cattle struggled on the steeper inclines, requiring more work from the cowboys to keep them moving in the right direction. Vivian did what she could to help, though Xavier insisted she stay back from the more dangerous work. "Not because you're a woman," he had explained when she protested, "because you don't have the experience. Any greenhorn would get the same instructions." She had accepted this, recognizing the wisdom in his caution. Instead, she took on more responsibilities around camp, freeing up the others to focus on the herd. One evening, as they made camp in a sheltered valley, Zachary rode in with news that a small town lay just a few miles to the east. Thought some of the boys might want to ride in, he told Xavier. Been a while since they've had any civilization. Xavier nodded. We can spare a few men for the evening, draw lots for who goes. To Vivian's surprise, Zachary suggested she might want to go as well. Might do you good to see something besides our ugly faces, Miss Vivian, he said with his characteristic good humor. Xavier looked concerned. I don't know if that's wise. Why not? Vivian asked. The idea of visiting a town, even a small one, appealed to her after weeks on the trail. Surely Victor's reach doesn't extend this far into Wyoming. Xavier and Zachary exchanged a look that Vivian couldn't quite interpret. It's not just that, Xavier said carefully. Trail towns can be rough places. I'll be with the men, Vivian pointed out, and I won't wander off alone. I'd like to remember what it feels like to be somewhere with 4 walls and a proper roof. After some discussion, Xavier reluctantly agreed, but insisted on accompanying her himself. We'll go in, have a proper meal, maybe buy some supplies, and come straight back, he said firmly. Vivian was too pleased with the prospect to argue with his conditions. She took extra care with her appearance, using precious water to wash her face and hands and brushing her hair until it shone. The weeks on the trail had changed her. Her skin was tanned, her body stronger, but she was still recognizably a lady, especially in her cleanest blouse. As they rode toward the town, Vivian felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She hadn't been in a public place since fleeing Provo, and while it seemed unlikely anyone would recognize her here, the fear of discovery lingered. The town was indeed small, just one main street with a handful of businesses on either side. A saloon, a general store, a small hotel, and a few other establishments catered to the needs of travelers and the sparse local population. Despite its size, the town bustled with activity, particularly around the saloon. Xavier helped Vivian dismount, then tied their horses to the hitching post outside the hotel, which also served as a restaurant. Let's eat first, he suggested. Then we can see about supplies. The hotel dining room was simple but clean, with checkered cloths on the tables and curtains at the windows, touches of civilization that Vivian had missed on the trail. A middle-aged woman showed them to a table, her eyebrows rising slightly at Vivian's presence with the cowboys. Special occasion, she asked as she handed them menus. Just passing through with our herd, Xavier replied easily. Thought we'd treat ourselves to a meal that didn't come from a chuck wagon. The woman nodded. Well, the beef stew is fresh today, and we've got apple pie for dessert. Sounds perfect, Vivian said with a smile. As they ate, Vivian found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of a meal served on real plates with proper utensils. The other diners paid them little attention, focused on their own meals and conversations. This was a good idea, Vivian admitted as she savored the last bite of her pie. Thank you for agreeing to it. Xavier smiled, and Vivian noticed how it transformed his usually serious face, making him look younger, more carefree. You're welcome. It's nice to see you enjoying yourself. After dinner, they visited the general store, where Xavier insisted on buying her a few small luxuries: a comb, a small mirror, and a book to read during the quiet evenings at camp. Vivian protested the expenditure, but Xavier waved off her concerns. Consider it an investment in camp morale, he said. A happy trail cook makes for happy cowboys. Vivian laughed, accepting the gifts with grace. As they left the store, however, her good mood evaporated at the sight of a newly posted notice on the community board outside. Missing, Vivian Keller, wife of Victor Keller, Provo, Utah. Disappeared May 15, 1878. Believed to be in a confused and vulnerable state. Reward offered for information leading to her safe return. The notice included a rough sketch that bore enough resemblance to Vivian to be recognizable, especially to someone looking closely. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. Xavier, noticing her reaction, followed her gaze to the poster. His expression hardened. "Let's go," he said quietly, taking her elbow and guiding her quickly toward their horses. "He's looking for me," Vivian whispered, her heart pounding. "All this way." "We don't know how far these notices have been posted," Xavier said, helping her mount quickly, "but we should get back to camp." They rode in silence, Vivian fighting back tears of fear and frustration. She had begun to believe she was free, that Victor would eventually give up and move on. The notice was a harsh reminder that he considered her his property, something to be retrieved regardless of her wishes. When they returned to camp, Xavier pulled her aside, away from the curious eyes of the other cowboys. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but intense. "That notice changes nothing. He doesn't know where you are and will be in Laramie in less than a week. From there, you can decide where to go next." "And if there are notices in Laramie too?" Vivian asked, unable to keep the despair from her voice. "Then we'll figure something out," Xavier promised. "You're not alone in this, Vivian." She looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "Why are you helping me like this? You barely know me." Xavier was silent for a long moment, then said simply, "Because it's the right thing to do." But there was something in his gaze that suggested there might be more to it than that something he wasn't yet ready to put into words. That night, sleep eluded Vivian. The discovery of the notice had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She lay in her tent, listening to the sounds of the night and the occasional movements of the cowboys on watch. When she finally drifted into an uneasy slumber, her dreams were filled with Victor's face, his eyes cold as he reached for her, telling her she belonged to him forever. She woke with a start, a cry on her lips, to find Xavier kneeling outside her tent. "Vivian, are you all right?" His voice was thick with concern. "Just a nightmare," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." "You didn't," he assured her. "I was on watch." He hesitated, then asked, "Can I get you anything? Water?" "No, thank you," Vivian said, trying to calm her racing heart. "I'll be fine." Xavier didn't move. "Would you? Would you like to sit by the fire for a while? Sometimes that helps after bad dreams." The invitation was simple, but the kindness behind it moved Vivian deeply. "Yes," she said. "I think I would." She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined Xavier by the small fire he had built away from the sleeping cowboys. The night was cool, the stars brilliant overhead in a way they never were in the city. "Want to talk about it?" Xavier asked as he handed her a cup of coffee. Vivian shook her head. "Not really, it was just him, Victor." Xavier nodded, understanding without needing details. "He can't hurt you now, can't he?" Vivian stared into the fire. "Those notices, if someone recognizes me, if they send word to him." "Then we'll deal with it," Xavier said firmly. "He may be looking for you, but he won't find you easily, and if he does—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his hand moved unconsciously to the pistol at his hip. "I don't want you risking yourself for me," Vivian said quietly. Xavier's eyes met hers across the fire. "Some things are worth the risk." There it was again, that unspoken something between them, growing stronger with each passing day. Vivian felt it like a physical presence, this connection that had formed so quickly yet felt so profound. "Tell me about your ranch in Colorado," she said, wanting to shift the conversation to something less intense, less fraught with emotion. Xavier seemed to understand her need for distraction. "It's not much compared to some spreads," he began. "About 200 acres in a valley with a year-round creek running through it. Good grazing land, some timber on the slopes. The house is small, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room, but solid. My pa built it with his own hands." As he described the property, Vivian could picture it. The modest house nestled against the mountains, herds of cattle grazing in green pastures, the creek sparkling in the sunlight. It sounded peaceful, secluded, safe. "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "It is," Xavier agreed. "Lonely sometimes, but it's home." He poked at the fire with a stick. "What about you? What kind of place would you want to call home if you could choose freely?" The question caught Vivian by surprise. She had been so focused on escaping Victor that she hadn't given much thought to what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "Somewhere quiet, I think, where I could have a garden and books." She smiled slightly. "And where no one would tell me what I can or cannot do." "Sounds reasonable enough," Xavier said with a smile of his own. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily between them as the night deepened. Vivian learned more about Xavier's life, his years working cattle drives, his dreams for his ranch, the time he had spent in California during the gold rush before returning to Colorado. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her father's business, her love of literature and art. It was the most open, honest conversation Vivian had had in years. With Victor, she had learned to guard her words carefully, to express only what he wanted to hear. With Xavier, she found herself speaking freely, without fear of judgment or reprisal. As the eastern sky began to lighten, hinting at the approaching dawn, Xavier reluctantly stood. "We should try to get a little more sleep before the day starts," he said. "Thank you for keeping me company during watch." "Thank you for listening," Vivian replied. "It helped more than the coffee." Xavier's expression softened. "Anytime, Vivian, I mean that." As they walked back toward the camp, their hands brushed accidentally. Vivian felt a jolt at the contact, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee or the fire. For a brief moment, neither pulled away. Then Xavier stepped back, ever the gentleman. "Sleep well," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "You too," Vivian replied, aware of a blush rising in her cheeks. In her tent, Vivian knew sleep would not return, but she didn't mind. The night's conversation had soothed her fears better than any remedy could have. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with a strength she was just beginning to recognize in herself, and with allies she had never expected to find on this journey. The cattle drive reached the outskirts of Laramie 4 days later, the towers of the town visible on the horizon as they crested a final ridge. Vivian felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at the sight. Laramie meant the end of the drive, and possibly the end of her time with Xavier and the cowboys who had become something like family over the past weeks. "We'll make camp here tonight," Xavier announced. "Tomorrow morning, Zachary and I will drive the herd to the Miller Ranch on the north side of town. The rest of you can take your pay and head into Laramie." The cowboys let out whoops of excitement at the prospect of town entertainments after weeks on the trail. Vivian, however, felt her stomach knot with anxiety. She had no idea what awaited her in Laramie, whether Victor's notices had reached this far, what she would do next. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier approached her as she helped Cookie with the evening meal. "Can we talk later?" he asked quietly. "After dinner," Vivian nodded, curious about what he wanted to discuss. The day continued with the usual camp routines, though there was an air of celebration among the men as they anticipated the end of the long journey. After dinner, Xavier gestured for Vivian to join him for a walk away from the camp. They strolled in silence for a few minutes, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson hues. Finally, Xavier spoke. "I've been thinking about your situation." Vivian glanced at him, waiting for him to continue. "You need somewhere safe to go, somewhere Keller won't think to look for you." Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her. "I'm heading back to my ranch after we deliver the cattle. You could come with me, if you wanted to." Vivian's heart skipped a beat. "To Colorado," Xavier nodded. "It's remote, quiet, no one would look for you there, and you'd have time to figure out your next steps." He quickly added, "There's a small cabin on the property where you could stay. You'd have your privacy, your independence. I wouldn't expect anything from you." The offer was generous, more than generous, and Vivian was touched by his consideration for her reputation and comfort. "You would do that for me." "I would," Xavier confirmed, "but it's entirely your choice. If you'd rather stay in Laramie or go somewhere else, I'll help you with that too." Vivian considered her options. Laramie was dangerous if Victor's search had reached this far. She had little money, no connections, nowhere else to go. And more than that, the thought of parting from Xavier filled her with a sadness she hadn't anticipated. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to accept your offer, at least until I can decide what to do next." The relief on Xavier's face was evident, though he tried to hide it. "Good, that's good." He cleared his throat. "We'll leave the day after tomorrow, once the herd is delivered and the men are paid." As they walked back to camp, Vivian felt a sense of anticipation replacing her earlier anxiety. Colorado. A new beginning, far from Victor's reach. And more time with Xavier, whose presence had become increasingly important to her. The following day, Xavier and Zachary drove the cattle to the Miller Ranch while Vivian remained at camp with Cookie and 2 other cowboys. The men were protective of her, careful not to leave her alone, aware by now of her situation, though Xavier had shared only the basics. When Xavier returned that evening, he brought news and supplies. "Herds delivered, payment collected," he announced. "And I've settled accounts with Miller for all your wages." He distributed money to each cowboy, thanking them for their work. To Vivian he handed a small purse. "Your share," he said when she looked confused, "for your work as camp cook's assistant." "But I didn't expect. You earned it," Xavier said firmly. "Fair pay for fair work." Vivian accepted the purse, deeply moved by his respect for her contribution. It wasn't a large sum, but it was money she had earned herself, something Victor had never allowed. The next morning, the cowboys prepared to go their separate ways. Some would stay in Laramie, others would head to other territories in search of work. Vivian was surprised by the genuine affection in their farewells. "You take care now, Miss Vivian," Zachary said, tipping his hat to her. "And keep an eye on X for me. He needs someone sensible around." "I will," she promised, smiling at the red-headed cowboy who had become a friend. Cookie surprised her with a gruff hug. "You're a good woman," he said simply. "Deserve better than what life's handed you so far." One by one, the men said their goodbyes, each in their own way acknowledging what she had brought to their journey. By the time they rode out, heading for town, Vivian was fighting back tears. "They're good men," Xavier said as they watched the cowboys disappear over the ridge. "Yes," Vivian agreed. "I'll miss them." Xavier began packing his supplies onto his horse and the pack mule he had purchased in town. "We should get moving if we want to make good distance today. It's about a week's ride to the ranch, maybe less if the weather holds." The journey to Colorado was different from the cattle drive, quieter, more intimate, with just the 2 of them traveling together. They rode side by side when the trail allowed it, talking easily about everything and nothing. At night, they made small camps, taking turns keeping watch, though the need for vigilance lessened the further they got from Laramie. Xavier was unfailingly respectful of Vivian's space and privacy, setting up her small tent each evening at a proper distance from his bedroll. Yet she found herself increasingly aware of him, the broad set of his shoulders, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their strength. On the 5th day of their journey, they crossed into Colorado territory. Xavier's demeanor changed subtly as they entered the landscape. He knew best more relaxed, more confident as he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory. "We should reach the ranch tomorrow," he told her as they made camp that evening. "There's a pass through those mountains ahead, and the valley lies just beyond it." Vivian felt a flutter of both anticipation and nervousness. Tomorrow would begin the next chapter of her journey living at Xavier's ranch, finding her footing in this new life she had chosen. "Are you sure your hands won't mind my being there?" she asked, voicing one of her concerns. "I only keep 2 men on regularly," Xavier explained. "Good fellows, both of them. They live in the bunkhouse, keep to themselves mostly." He added with a slight smile, "And they know better than to cause any trouble." "And what will you tell them about me?" Vivian asked. Xavier considered this. "The truth, or as much of it as they need to know, that you're a friend who needs a safe place to stay for a while." He met her eyes. "No one on my ranch will pry into your business, Vivian. You have my word on that." The sincerity in his voice reassured her. In the weeks she had known him, Xavier Young had never given her reason to doubt his word. That night, as Vivian lay in her tent listening to the sounds of the Colorado wilderness, she found herself thinking about the future not with fear, but with cautious hope. For the first time since fleeing Provo, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond survival, beyond running. A life where she might find happiness again. And increasingly, her vision of that life included the quiet cowboy sleeping just yards away, whose steady presence had become her anchor in the storm. The Young ranch came into view the following afternoon, nestled in a valley just as Xavier had described. A modest house stood on a small rise, surrounded by outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, storage sheds. Pastures stretched to the north, where cattle grazed peacefully. A creek wove through the property, lined with cottonwoods and willows, their leaves dancing in the breeze. "It's beautiful," Vivian said sincerely as they approached. Xavier nodded, pride evident in his expression. "Not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it's good land, growing every year." As they rode toward the house, 2 men emerged from the barn. One was older, with gray hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, maybe in his 20s, tall and lanky. Both watched their approach with curious eyes. "That's Jim and Billy," Xavier explained. "Jim's been with me since my pa's time. Billy's newer, came on last year." He dismounted as they reached the yard, helping Vivian down from her mare. "Jim, Billy," he called in greeting. "Good to see you both." The men approached, their gazes moving from Xavier to Vivian with undisguised curiosity. "Boss," Jim nodded. "Everything go all right with the drive?" "Smooth as could be hoped," Xavier confirmed. "Got a good price for the herd." He turned to Vivian. "This is Miss Vivian Keller. She'll be staying in the north cabin for a while." If the men were surprised by this announcement, they hid it well. Jim touched his hat in greeting. "Madam, welcome to the Young ranch." Billy, the younger man, blushed slightly as he too tipped his hat. "Madam." "Thank you," Vivian replied. "I appreciate your hospitality." "Jim, could you help Billy take the horses to the barn?" Xavier asked. "I'm going to show Miss Vivian to the cabin." As the men led the horses away, Xavier guided Vivian toward a path that led away from the main house. "The cabin's just through those trees," he explained. "It's where my pa lived after he got too old to run the ranch day to day. Been empty since he passed, but we keep it maintained." The path wound through a small grove of aspens before opening onto a clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood. It was small but well built, with a covered porch and windows flanking the front door. "It's not fancy," Xavier said as he opened the door, "but it's solid and dry." Vivian stepped inside, taking in the simple space. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a table and chairs and a rocking chair by the hearth. A doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom. "It's perfect," she said, turning to Xavier with a genuine smile. "Truly." Relief crossed his face. "There's a pump for water out back, and the outhouse is just beyond that. Wood piles stocked, and there should be basic supplies in the kitchen." He hesitated. "I thought you might want to rest today, get settled. Tomorrow I can show you around the ranch if you like." "I'd like that very much," Vivian replied. Xavier nodded, suddenly seeming almost shy. "Well, I'll leave you to settle in. If you need anything, I'm just down the path at the main house." As he turned to go, Vivian called after him. "Xavier." When he looked back, she said simply, "Thank you for everything." His expression softened. "You're welcome, Vivian. See you in the morning." Left alone in the cabin, Vivian explored her new home. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a well-made bed, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the creek. The kitchen had basic utensils and some staples: flour, sugar, coffee, salt. Everything was clean and well-maintained, if simple. She unpacked her few belongings, arranging them in the chest of drawers. The book Xavier had bought her in Wyoming went on the small shelf by the bed. Looking at her possessions, so few compared to what she had owned as Victor Keller's wife, Vivian felt no regret. These things were truly hers, not granted at the whim of a controlling husband. That evening, as she sat in the rocking chair watching the sunset through the cabin window, Vivian felt a peace she had not known in years. The cabin was quiet, but not lonely. Outside, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Nature's sounds, not the raised voice of an angry man. For the first time since fleeing into the woods outside Provo, Vivian allowed herself to believe that she might truly be free. The following weeks established a rhythm to Vivian's new life at the Young ranch. Each morning, she woke with the sun, prepared a simple breakfast, and then often walked to the main house, where Xavier would be planning the day's work with Jim and Billy. Despite Xavier's assurances that she was a guest, not a worker, Vivian insisted on contributing to the ranch's operation. She took over the cooking for all four of them, prepared supplies for when the men were working far from the house, and gradually took on management of the household aspects of the ranch: inventory, accounts, correspondence tasks Xavier had always found tedious. "You have a better head for numbers than I do," he admitted one evening as she organized the ranch's account books at the kitchen table. "Pa always said I was better with cattle than columns." Vivian smiled, enjoying the praise. "I helped my father with his business from the time I was 16, she explained. "He believed a woman should understand finance as well as any man." "Wise man, your father," Xavier commented, watching her work with undisguised admiration. As June turned to July, and July to August, Vivian found herself increasingly at home on the ranch. The isolation that might have bothered another woman suited her perfectly after years of Victor's controlling presence. The space and freedom were luxuries beyond price. She began to put her own touches on the cabin: wildflowers in jars on the table, a quilt she had purchased on a rare trip into the nearest town draped over the rocking chair. She started a small garden behind the cabin, planting vegetables and herbs that thrived in the Colorado soil. Xavier was a constant but unobtrusive presence. He checked on her daily, invited her to dinner at the main house, brought her books he thought she might enjoy from his modest library. They spent many evenings together on the porch of either the cabin or the main house, talking as the stars emerged above the valley. Through these conversations, they continued to learn about each other. Vivian shared more about her life before Victor, her education, her friends in St. Louis, her dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher before marriage had intervened. Xavier told her about his travels before settling permanently on the ranch, his hopes of expanding the property, the challenges of ranching in the sometimes harsh Colorado climate. What remained unspoken between them was the growing attraction that both clearly felt. Xavier was unfailingly proper, never presuming, never pushing beyond the boundaries of friendship. But Vivian caught the way his gaze lingered on her sometimes, saw the smile that seemed reserved only for her. For her part, Vivian found herself thinking of Xavier at odd moments throughout the day, wondering what he would think of a passage in her book, looking forward to sharing something she had seen on her walk, simply anticipating his company each evening. It was a slow, gentle awakening of feelings she had thought Victor had destroyed forever: trust, affection, desire. Yet fear still held her back from acknowledging these feelings aloud. She was, after all, still legally married to Victor Keller. And the shadows of that marriage, the pain, the fear, the self-doubt had not fully receded. One evening in late August, as summer began its transition to fall, Xavier invited Vivian to ride with him to a part of the ranch she had not yet seen. "There's a place up in the higher pastures I think you might like," he said. "The view of the valley is something special, especially this time of year." They rode out after the day's work was done, when the late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light. Xavier led the way up a winding trail through stands of aspen, already beginning to hint at their autumn brilliance. The place turned out to be a natural overlook, a flat rock outcropping that jutted from the hillside, offering a panoramic view of the entire valley. The ranch buildings looked like toys from this height, the creek a silver ribbon winding through green pastures. "Oh, Xavier," Vivian breathed as they dismounted. "It's magnificent." Xavier smiled, pleased by her reaction. "My pa used to bring me up here when I was a boy. Said a man needs to step back sometimes, see the bigger picture." They sat on the edge of the outcropping, legs dangling, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn. "I've never thanked you properly," Vivian said after a comfortable silence. "Not just for taking me in, but for seeing me as a person, not a possession." Xavier looked at her, his expression serious. "You don't need to thank me for treating you with the respect you deserve, Vivian." "But many wouldn't," she pointed out. "To most men, a married woman fleeing her husband would be someone to avoid, not help." "I'm not most men," Xavier said simply. "No," Vivian agreed softly. "You're not." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the unspoken attraction between them seemed to crystallize into something tangible, something neither could deny any longer. Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "Vivian," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Yes. I've tried to keep my distance, to be respectful of all you've been through," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I need you to know, I've come to care for you deeply." Vivian's breath caught. Though she had sensed his feelings, hearing them spoken aloud was different, frightening and exhilarating at once. "I care for you too, Xavier," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling of leaves. "But I'm still married. In the eyes of the law, at least." Xavier's expression darkened momentarily. "A marriage is more than a legal document," he said. "It's a bond of trust, respect, love. Keller broke that bond when he raised his hand to you." "Even so," Vivian said, "I don't know if I'm ready for whatever this might become." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Vivian. I just needed you to know how I feel. The rest we can figure out with time." He started to withdraw his hand from her cheek, but Vivian caught it, holding it in place. "That doesn't mean I don't want this," she said. "It just means I need to be sure of myself most of all." Xavier's smile returned, warming his eyes. "Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, they sat together on the overlook, hands intertwined, not speaking but communicating nonetheless. Something had shifted between them. A door opened that could not be closed again. Vivian felt both terrified and liberated by this new development. The scars of her marriage to Victor ran deep, making trust difficult. Yet she could no longer deny that what she felt for Xavier was real and growing stronger each day. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Vivian found herself wondering for the first time if there might be a future for her that included not just freedom from Victor, but happiness with someone else, someone who saw her value, respected her mind, and cherished her heart. The thought was both thrilling and daunting. But as she looked at Xavier riding beside her, his profile strong against the evening sky, she found herself willing to explore the possibility, one careful step at a time. The crisp days of September brought a flurry of activity to the Young ranch. The cattle needed to be moved to lower pastures before winter set in. Buildings required maintenance to withstand the coming cold, and supplies had to be secured for the months when travel would be difficult. Vivian threw herself into these preparations, learning new skills and discovering a strength within herself she had not known existed. She helped preserve food from her garden, assisted Xavier in repairing the cabin's roof, and even learned to chop firewood under Jim's patient instruction. "You're a natural ranchwoman, Miss Vivian," Jim commented one day as she successfully split a log on her first try. "Never seen a city lady take to it so well." Vivian laughed, surprised by how much the compliment pleased her. "I don't feel much like a city lady anymore," she admitted. "And I'm glad of it." Her relationship with Xavier continued to evolve, though both maintained a careful restraint. Their evening conversations now often included subtle touches, his hand covering hers on the porch railing, her head occasionally resting against his shoulder as they watched the stars. They had not kissed, but the possibility of it hung between them, growing stronger with each passing day. One morning in late September, Xavier announced that he needed to ride into Denver for supplies and business at the bank. "I'll be gone 3 days, maybe 4, he told Vivian as they shared breakfast at the main house. "Jim and Billy will be here if you need anything." Vivian nodded, trying to hide her disappointment at the thought of his absence. "Is there anything I can do while you're away?" "Any ranch business that needs attention." Xavier smiled at her eagerness. "The books are up to date thanks to you. Just keep an eye on things as you always do." He hesitated, then added, "There's a letter I need posted if you wouldn't mind adding it to the stack for the mail rider." "Of course," Vivian said, curious about the letter but not wanting to pry. After breakfast, Xavier prepared for his journey while Vivian returned to the cabin to gather eggs from the small chicken coop she now maintained. When she came back to the main house, Xavier was saddling his horse with Jim and Billy helping load supplies for the trip. "Be careful," Vivian said as she walked him to his horse. "The weather's changing quickly." "I will," Xavier promised. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket. "I almost forgot, the letter for posting." He handed her an envelope. As Vivian took it, she noticed it was addressed to a law firm in Salt Lake City. Despite herself, she raised a questioning eyebrow. Xavier saw her expression and sighed. "I've been making inquiries," he admitted. About the possibility of ending a marriage in cases of." He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. Vivian felt her heart skip. "You've been looking into divorce on my behalf." Xavier nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I hope you don't mind, I just thought. You should know your options, if you ever wanted to be truly free of him." Tears pricked Vivian's eyes. No one had ever taken such steps to help her, to give her choices rather than making them for her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more than I can express." Xavier's expression softened. He glanced toward Jim and Billy, who were discreetly occupied with their tasks, then back to Vivian. Slowly he reached out and touched her cheek, a gesture that had become familiar and precious to her. "I want you to be happy, Vivian," he said quietly. "Whatever that means for you." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised. "Stay safe." Vivian watched him ride away, the letter clutched in her hand, her mind and heart racing with possibilities she had not dared consider before. The first 2 days of Xavier's absence passed uneventfully. Vivian kept busy with her usual tasks, spent time with her growing flock of chickens, and even accompanied Jim on a ride to check fences in the north pasture. On the 3rd day, dark clouds rolled in from the mountains, bringing an early snow that blanketed the valley in white. Vivian watched from the cabin window, worry creeping into her thoughts. Xavier should have been on his way back from Denver by now. Would the snow delay him? That evening, as she prepared a simple dinner, a knock at the cabin door startled her. Expecting Jim or Billy with news, she opened it without hesitation. The sight that greeted her turned her blood to ice. Victor Keller stood on her porch, snow dusting his expensive coat, his cold eyes taking in her appearance with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. "Hello, wife," he said, the familiar sneer in his voice. "How kind of you to finally stop running." Vivian's hand gripped the door, ready to slam it shut, but Victor was faster. He pushed his way inside, forcing her to step back. "How?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "How did I find you?" Victor closed the door behind him, cutting off her escape. "It wasn't difficult, Vivian. You left quite a trail. The hotel owner in Laramie was particularly helpful when I showed him your picture. And your cowboy friend wasn't exactly discreet about purchasing supplies for a woman before heading to Colorado." Vivian's mind raced. Xavier wasn't due back until tomorrow at the earliest. Jim and Billy were in the bunkhouse, too far to hear a call for help. She was alone with the man she had fled months ago, the man whose cruelty had driven her into the woods that fateful night. "What do you want, Victor?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He laughed, the sound chilling. "What do I want? I want my wife to return home where she belongs. I want an end to this embarrassing escapade. Do you have any idea how it looks, Vivian? Having my wife run off like a common trollop." "I'm not going back with you," Vivian said, her fear giving way to determination. She was not the same frightened woman who had fled Provo. Not ever. Victor's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice. You're my wife, my property." "I belong to no one but myself," Vivian replied, lifting her chin. Victor moved suddenly, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You've forgotten your place," he hissed. "But I'll remind you." He raised his other hand, and Vivian braced for the blow she had felt so many times before. But it never came. The door burst open, and Xavier stood there, snow-covered and grim, his pistol aimed directly at Victor. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Now." Victor froze, his grip on Vivian's arm slackening just enough for her to pull free and move away from him. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy," Victor said, his composure quickly returning. "This is between me and my wife." "I made it my concern the night I found her running for her life," Xavier replied, not lowering his weapon. "Now, you're going to turn around and leave my property, or I'm going to put a bullet in you. Your choice." Victor's eyes narrowed, assessing the man before him. Whatever he saw in Xavier's expression must have convinced him of the seriousness of the threat, because he took a step back. "This isn't over," he said, looking at Vivian. "A wife cannot simply leave her husband. The law is on my side." "The law may not protect women as it should," Xavier agreed coldly, but it does recognize a man's right to defend his home and the people in it. Now go. For a tense moment, Vivian thought Victor might refuse. Then, with a last venomous glare at her, he stalked out the door. Xavier backed out after him, keeping the pistol trained on Victor until he mounted his horse and rode away. Only when Victor was out of sight did Xavier holster his weapon and turn to Vivian. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing to her in 2 strides. Vivian shook her head, though her arm throbbed where Victor had gripped it. "I'm all right," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "How did you know? I thought you weren't due back until tomorrow." "Finished my business early and rode straight through when I saw the storm coming," Xavier explained. "Passed a stranger on the road near the ranch. Something didn't sit right about him." His expression darkened. "When I got to the main house and Jim said someone had been asking for directions to the north cabin, I knew." Relief at his timely arrival gave way to a new fear. "He'll be back," Vivian said. "He won't give up now that he's found me." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready for him." He guided her to a chair, kneeling before her to look into her face. "Vivian, listen to me. I won't let him take you, I promise you that." The conviction in his voice steadied her. "What do we do now?" "Now we prepare," Xavier said simply, "and we fight back." That night, Xavier refused to return to the main house, insisting on sleeping on the cabin's small sofa to ensure Vivian's safety. Before settling in, he had explained the situation to Jim and Billy, who immediately offered their support. "Nobody's taking Miss Vivian anywhere she doesn't want to go," Billy had declared with uncharacteristic firmness, a sentiment Jim had heartily endorsed. Despite the warmth of their support, Vivian slept poorly, haunted by Victor's reappearance and the knowledge that her peaceful existence at the Young ranch was now threatened. The following morning, Xavier called a council at the main house to discuss their strategy. "Keller will be back," he stated as they gathered around the kitchen table, "probably with the law on his side. We need to be prepared." "Can he really force her to go with him?" Billy asked, his young face troubled. "Even if she doesn't want to?" "Legally, a husband has rights to his wife," Xavier acknowledged grimly. "But there are circumstances where those rights can be challenged, especially in cases of cruelty." He turned to Vivian. "The letter I sent to Salt Lake City was to inquire about divorce proceedings in cases of abuse. If we can establish a legal challenge to Keller's claims, it might buy us time." Vivian nodded, grateful for his foresight. "But Victor has connections, money. He can afford better lawyers, influence judges." "Maybe," Xavier conceded, "but he's not on his home ground anymore. This is Colorado territory, not Utah. Different jurisdiction, different people, and we have something he doesn't." "What's that?" Jim asked. Xavier looked around the table. "Friends, community. People who know Vivian for who she really is, not the confused, unstable woman Keller has been portraying in those notices." He laid out his plan. They would ride into town that day to speak with the local sheriff, explaining the situation before Victor could present his side. They would consult with the town's attorney about possible legal protections, and they would ensure that the community understood the true nature of Victor Keller's character. "It won't be easy," Xavier warned Vivian. "You'll have to tell your story, probably more than once." "Are you prepared for that?" Vivian took a deep breath. The thought of publicly discussing the abuse she had suffered was daunting, yet the alternative, returning to Victor, was unthinkable. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm done hiding in shame for something that was never my fault." Xavier's eyes filled with pride. "Then let's ride to town." The town of Cedar Creek was small, but it served as the commercial and legal hub for the surrounding ranches. As Vivian rode beside Xavier down the main street, she felt the curious gazes of townsfolk. many of whom had seen her only in passing during her rare visits over the past months. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, a modest building at the end of the street. Sheriff Thomas Mills was a former cavalry officer, his bearing still military despite his civilian clothes. He listened gravely as Vivian, with Xavier's supportive presence beside her, recounted her marriage to Victor and the circumstances of her escape. "I've seen cases like this before," the sheriff said when she had finished. "Not proud to say the law often sides with the husband, even in cases of mistreatment." He studied Vivian's face. "But I'm not inclined to hand any woman over to a man who beats her, legal wife or not." Vivian felt a surge of hope at his words. "Then you'll help us?" Sheriff Mills nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can within the law. If Keller comes to me, I'll stall, ask questions, make him prove his claims. But you should know, if he brings proper documentation, marriage certificate, perhaps a doctor's statement about your mental state, my hands may be tied." "We understand," Xavier said. "We're also going to consult with Mr. Reynolds about legal options." "Good idea," the sheriff agreed. "Henry Reynolds knows the territorial laws better than anyone. If there's a legal way to protect Mrs. Keller, he'll find it." Their meeting with the attorney was similarly encouraging, if cautious. Henry Reynolds, a shrewd man in his 50s, listened attentively to Vivian's story, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Divorce is difficult to obtain," he explained when she had finished, "but not impossible, especially in cases of cruelty. Colorado Territory has more progressive laws than Utah in this regard." He outlined the process. Vivian would need to file a petition citing specific instances of cruelty, provide witnesses if possible, and establish residence in Colorado Territory for the required period. "The challenge," Reynolds continued, "is that your husband could contest the divorce, claim you abandoned the marriage without cause, even question your mental competence to file such a petition." "He's already doing that with those notices," Xavier pointed out. Reynolds nodded grimly. "Indeed. Which is why establishing your credibility here in Cedar Creek is crucial, Mrs. Keller. The more people who know you as a rational, competent woman, the harder it will be for your husband to paint you as confused or unstable." By the time they left the attorney's office, Vivian felt simultaneously hopeful and exhausted. The path to freedom from Victor would not be easy or quick, but for the first time, it seemed possible. As they walked down the street toward the general store, where Xavier needed to purchase supplies, a woman's voice called Vivian's name. She turned to see Martha Wilson, the storekeeper's wife and one of the few women Vivian had met during her time in Colorado. "Mrs. Wilson," Vivian greeted her with a smile. "I was hoping to see you in town soon," Martha said, her kind face creased with concern. "A man was asking about you yesterday, well-dressed from back east by his accent, said he was your husband." Vivian's smile faded. "He was. He is, legally at least." Martha's expression sharpened with understanding. "I see. Well, I didn't tell him anything useful, I can assure you. Something about him didn't sit right with me." "Thank you," Vivian said sincerely. "Your instincts were correct." Martha hesitated, then said, "My sister left a bad marriage 15 years ago. Best decision she ever made, though it wasn't easy." She touched Vivian's arm gently. "If you need anything at all, you come to me. The women of Cedar Creek take care of their own." The unexpected support brought tears to Vivian's eyes. "That means more than you know." As they continued their errands, word seemed to spread through the small town. Women stopped to speak with Vivian, offering quiet support or sharing similar stories. Men tipped their hats respectfully, several assuring Xavier that Eastern fellow would find no help in Cedar Creek if his intentions toward Vivian were unwelcome. By the time they rode back to the ranch that evening, Vivian felt wrapped in a community's protection in a way she had never experienced before. "I didn't expect that," she admitted to Xavier as they approached the ranch. "Such support from people who barely know me." Xavier smiled. "Small communities out here understand dependency. We all need each other to survive, and most folks have little patience for men who abuse those dependent on them, especially women and children." That night, as they ate dinner at the main house with Jim and Billy, Vivian felt a new resolve strengthening within her. She would not run from Victor again. Here, with Xavier and the community of Cedar Creek behind her, she would make her stand. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Just 2 days later, Victor returned to the Young ranch, this time accompanied by a man who introduced himself as a deputy from Provo. Xavier met them in the yard of the main house, standing tall and unyielding as Victor demanded to see his wife. "Mrs. Keller is resting," Xavier said calmly, though Vivian, watching from the window, could see the tension in his shoulders. "And she has made it clear she has no desire to speak with you." "This has gone on long enough," Victor snapped. "I have documentation proving she is my legal wife and that she has been in an unstable state of mind." He produced papers from his coat. "I also have a statement from our family doctor confirming her condition." The deputy, looking uncomfortable, stepped forward. "I don't have jurisdiction here, Mr. Young, but these papers appear to be in order. I'm just here to facilitate Mrs. Keller's safe return to her husband." "You have no authority in Colorado territory," Xavier stated flatly. "And those papers aren't worth the ink used to sign them if they were obtained under false pretenses." Victor's face flushed with anger. "How dare you? I am a respected banker, not some what, Mr. Keller? Not some man who beats his wife." "Because I found her in the woods with bruises that say otherwise." Xavier's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the words. The deputy shifted uneasily, glancing between the two men. "Perhaps we should speak with Mrs. Keller directly," he suggested. "If she's being held against her will, I am not." All heads turned as Vivian emerged from the house, her head high, her gaze fixed on Victor. She had debated remaining hidden, letting Xavier handle the confrontation, but something had changed within her. She would no longer allow others to speak for her or about her, especially not Victor. "I left of my own free will," she continued, moving to stand beside Xavier, "because I feared for my life." Victor's expression darkened. "Vivian, you're confused. These people have filled your head with nonsense. It's time to come home where you belong." "I am home," Vivian replied firmly, "and I am not confused. For the first time in years, I see things clearly." She turned to the deputy. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but I am not being held against my will. I chose to leave a marriage that had become dangerous to my well-being." The deputy looked uncertain. "Madam, under the law," Vivian interrupted, "I have filed a petition for divorce citing cruelty. My attorney in Cedar Creek can confirm this." This wasn't strictly true. The petition was being prepared but had not yet been filed, but Vivian knew the declaration would buy them time. Victor's face contorted with fury. "You cannot divorce me. No court will grant it." "That will be for the court to decide," Vivian replied, surprised by her own calm in the face of his rage. "In the meantime, I am establishing legal residence in Colorado territory, where I intend to remain." The deputy cleared his throat. "Mr. Keller, if your wife has filed for divorce in Colorado territory, there's not much I can do until the courts make a determination." He looked genuinely relieved to have an excuse to step back from the increasingly tense situation. Victor turned on the man. "You're supposed to help me retrieve my wife." "I'm supposed to uphold the law," the deputy corrected, his own patience clearly wearing thin. "And the law says I have no jurisdiction here, especially with a pending divorce petition." For a moment, Vivian thought Victor might physically lunge at her or the deputy. Instead, he visibly composed himself, smoothing his features into the respectable mask he wore so well in public. "This isn't over," he said, looking directly at Vivian. "You are my wife, and you will return to Provo with me, one way or another." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, but Vivian refused to flinch. "No, Victor, I won't. Not now, not ever." With a final venomous glare, Victor turned and strode back to his horse. The deputy lingered a moment, looking uncertainly at Vivian. "Madam, if you are indeed filing for divorce, I suggest you proceed quickly," he said quietly. "Mr. Keller is determined." "Thank you for your concern," Vivian replied, "but I have good people helping me." As Victor and the deputy rode away, Vivian felt Xavier's hand come to rest lightly on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said softly. Vivian turned to him, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but I couldn't hide any longer. Couldn't let him speak of me as if I weren't even present, as if I had no voice or will of my own." Xavier's eyes shone with pride and something deeper, something that made Vivian's heart race for reasons entirely unrelated to fear. "You have the strongest will I've ever encountered, Vivian Keller. And the bravest heart." That evening, after the excitement had settled and Jim and Billy had returned to their duties, though both remained vigilant, taking turns keeping watch from the bunkhouse, Xavier and Vivian sat on the porch of the main house, discussing their next steps. "We need to file that divorce petition as soon as possible," Xavier said. "Reynolds can have the papers ready by tomorrow if we ride into town first thing." Vivian nodded, her mind still processing the day's events. "Do you think Victor will give up now?" Xavier considered this. "Not completely. But he's a man who cares about appearances, about his reputation. If enough people in Cedar Creek know the truth, if the law begins to side with you, he may decide the fight isn't worth the potential scandal." "I hope you're right," Vivian said softly, "but I fear he won't let go easily. His pride is too deeply wounded." Xavier reached for her hand, holding it gently between his own. "Whatever comes, Vivian, you're not alone. Not anymore." The simple truth of that statement washed over her like a wave. She wasn't alone. After years of isolation in her marriage, of feeling that no one would believe or help her, she was surrounded by people who stood with her Xavier most of all. "I know," she whispered, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. "And that makes all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them. The future still held uncertainties. Victor's next move, the outcome of the divorce petition, the long process of healing from years of abuse. But in that moment, with Xavier's hand warm and steady around hers, Vivian felt a peace that transcended circumstances. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of tension and hope for Vivian. As promised, they filed the divorce petition immediately, with Henry Reynolds assuring them he would expedite the process as much as possible. Sheriff Mills increased his patrols near the Young ranch, though Victor had not returned since being confronted by Vivian. Life on the ranch continued its rhythms despite the underlying worry. The cattle were moved to winter pastures, the last of the harvest was preserved, and preparations for the coming cold months occupied everyone's days. Vivian found herself more integrated into the ranch's operations than ever. Xavier increasingly consulted her on business decisions, valuing her sharp mind and practical suggestions. Jim taught her more about animal husbandry, while Billy showed her how to repair tack and basic ranch equipment. Her confidence grew with each new skill mastered. Each day that passed without Victor's shadow falling across her path, her relationship with Xavier deepened as well, though both maintained a certain caution. The legal complexities of her situation were ever present in their minds, tempering their growing feelings with practical restraint. Yet there were moments, a lingering touch, a shared glance, an evening conversation that stretched long into the night that spoke of a future both increasingly desired. October brought the first significant snowfall, transforming the valley into a pristine wonderland of white. Vivian stood on the porch of her cabin, wrapped in the warm coat Xavier had given her, watching as the flakes drifted down to blanket the ground. The crunch of boots on snow announced Xavier's approach before she saw him, emerging from the swirling white like an apparition. He carried a bundle under one arm, his face alight with boyish excitement that made Vivian smile. "What has you looking so pleased with yourself?" she asked as he climbed the steps to join her on the porch. "Mail came through before the pass closed," he explained, holding up the bundle. "Letters, newspapers, and this." He extracted an official-looking document from the stack. Vivian's heart skipped. "Is that?" Xavier nodded. "From Reynolds. The court has agreed to hear your divorce petition. The judge set a date for January after the worst of winter passes." Relief flooded through Vivian. It wasn't the final victory, but it was a crucial step. The territorial court's willingness to consider her petition meant they recognized the validity of her claims. "There's more," Xavier continued, his expression sobering slightly. "Reynolds received word that Keller has returned to Provo. Apparently, his standing at the bank was compromised by his extended absence and certain rumors about his conduct toward you." Vivian felt a complex mixture of emotions at this news. The idea that Victor might be experiencing consequences for his actions was satisfying, yet she knew his humiliation would only fuel his anger toward her. "You think he's given up?" she asked, not quite daring to hope. Xavier's expression was cautious. "Not necessarily. But with winter closing the mountain passes, he won't be able to return until spring at the earliest. That gives us time to strengthen your case, gather more statements from people in Cedar Creek who know you now." The realization that she had months of safety ahead was like a weight lifting from Vivian's shoulders. For the first time since Victor's appearance at the ranch, she could breathe fully, without the constant tension of anticipating his next move. "That's wonderful news," she said, smiling up at Xavier. "We should celebrate." Xavier's answering smile warmed her more than any fire could have. "I thought you might say that." He reached into his coat and produced a small package, "which is why I got this when I was in town last week." Curious, Vivian unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with intricate designs of flowers and vines. "Xavier," she breathed, running her fingers over the supple leather. "It's beautiful. You mentioned once that you used to keep a journal before you were married," Xavier explained. "Thought you might like to start again, writing your story in your own words." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved Vivian deeply. Victor had discouraged her writing, considering it a waste of time that could be better spent on household duties. That Xavier not only remembered her casual mention of enjoying writing, but actively encouraged, it spoke volumes about the difference between the two men. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him with eyes that threatened tears. "For this and for everything else." Xavier's expression softened. He reached out to brush a snowflake from her cheek, his touch lingering longer than necessary. "You're welcome, Vivian, always." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Vivian was acutely aware of their proximity, of the warmth of his hand against her cold cheek, of the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Vivian," he said softly, uncertainly. "May I?" She nodded, unable to form words, her heart hammering in her chest. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Xavier leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, tentative kiss. It was brief, chaste even, but it sent a warmth spreading through Vivian that had nothing to do with the temperature. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers for any sign of regret or discomfort. Finding none, he smiled that rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I've been wanting to do that for a very long time," he admitted. "I've been wanting you to," Vivian confessed, a blush warming her cheeks. Xavier's smile widened. He took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply touching. "We should get inside before we freeze," he suggested. "I believe you mentioned celebration." They spent the evening in the main house, sharing a special dinner Xavier had prepared with surprising skill. They talked of everything and nothing ranch business, books they had read, memories of childhood, dreams for the future. As the fire crackled in the hearth and snow continued to fall outside, Vivian felt a contentment she had thought forever beyond her reach. Their relationship shifted after that snowy day, not dramatically but significantly. The careful restraint they had maintained loosened, allowing for more frequent touches, occasional kisses, and a growing comfort with expressing their feelings for each other. Yet both were conscious of the legal reality. Vivian was still married in the eyes of the law, would be until the court ruled on her petition. This knowledge tempered their relationship, kept it within the bounds of propriety despite the deepening of their emotional connection. Winter settled fully over the Colorado mountains, isolating the ranch from the outside world for days at a time when snowstorms made travel impossible. Vivian, who might once have found such isolation frightening, instead discovered it peaceful, even liberating. The snow created a natural barrier between her and Victor, a temporary reprieve from the ongoing legal battle. She took Xavier's gift to heart, writing daily in the journal, recording not just current events but the story of her marriage, her escape, her journey to finding herself again. The process was sometimes painful, forcing her to confront memories she had tried to suppress, but ultimately healing. On paper, she could see the patterns of Victor's abuse with a clarity that had eluded her while living through it. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive spirit that spread even to the isolated ranch. Xavier, Jim, and Billy cut a pine from the hillside, setting it up in the main house and decorating it with simple ornaments, many handmade. Vivian baked cookies from her mother's recipes, filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and ginger. On Christmas Eve, after a dinner that had brought them all together around the table, Xavier asked Vivian to bundle up for a short walk. Curious, she complied, following him out into the still, cold night. The sky was clear, stars blazing with impossible brightness above the snow-covered valley. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air as Xavier led her to a spot near the creek, now frozen over and glittering in the moonlight. "I wanted to give you your Christmas gift privately," he explained, reaching into his coat pocket. "Xavier, you've already given me so much," Vivian protested gently. He shook his head. "This is different." He withdrew a small box, holding it out to her with an expression that mixed hope and uncertainty. "It's not what you might think," he added quickly. "I know your situation. Our situation is complicated." Intrigued, Vivian opened the box to find a simple silver ring, elegantly crafted but not ostentatious. "It was my mother's," Xavier explained as she lifted it from the box. "One of the few things of hers that survived. My pa kept it all those years, gave it to me before he died." Vivian looked up at him, heart racing. "Xavier, it's not an engagement ring," he clarified. "Not yet, not until you're truly free, but it is a promise." He took her gloved hands in his. "A promise that when the time is right, if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you, Vivian. A real marriage based on respect and love." Tears filled Vivian's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered. "When the time is right, I want that too." Xavier's face lit with happiness. He took the ring and slipped it onto the third finger of her right hand, not the traditional placement for a wedding band, but a symbol nonetheless of their intention. "I love you, Vivian Keller," he said simply. "Have almost since the moment I found you in those woods." "And I love you, Xavier Young," Vivian replied, the words coming easily, naturally. "You showed me what love should be, what it could be." He pulled her close, kissing her with more passion than he had allowed himself before. Vivian returned the kiss, arms circling his neck, heart full to bursting with a happiness she had once thought forever beyond her reach. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand under the winter stars, Vivian felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, Victor's potential return in spring, the uncertainty of the divorce, hearing she would face them with Xavier beside her, with the strength she had discovered within herself, with the support of a community that had embraced her. For the first time in years, Vivian looked to the future not with fear, but with hope. January brought the divorce hearing, held in the Cedar Creek courthouse on a bitterly cold day. Vivian testified about the abuse she had suffered, supported by statements from those who had seen her condition when she first arrived in Colorado. Victor had sent a representative rather than appearing himself, a lawyer who attempted to portray Vivian as mentally unstable and Xavier as a man who had taken advantage of her vulnerable state. The judge, a stern but fair-minded man, listened to all testimony before reserving his decision, promising to deliver it within the month. February passed in anxious waiting, the ranch gradually emerging from winter's grip as days lengthened and temperatures slowly rose. Vivian threw herself into planning for spring planting, expanding her garden and even suggesting a small orchard that could provide fruit for the ranch in coming years. March brought the news they had been waiting for. The judge had granted Vivian's petition for divorce, citing Victor's cruelty and abandonment of his marital responsibilities. The relief was immense, but tempered by the knowledge that Victor, upon receiving the news, might make one final attempt to reassert control. Their vigilance proved warranted. In early April, as the mountain passes cleared enough for travel, Sheriff Mills rode out to the ranch with news that Victor Keller had been seen in Cedar Creek, asking questions about the Young property. He seemed determined, the sheriff reported gravely. Mentioned something about settling accounts. Xavier increased security on the ranch, ensuring that Vivian was never alone, that someone was always watching the approaches to the property. The peaceful routine of their life was disrupted by this return to constant vigilance, but Vivian refused to be driven into hiding again. "I won't let him make me a prisoner, even of fear," she declared when Xavier suggested she might be safer staying in the main house rather than her cabin. The confrontation, when it came, was both expected and shocking in its violence. Victor arrived at the ranch on a clear spring morning when Xavier and the men were checking the north pasture. Vivian was alone in her garden, planting early vegetables, when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. She stood, brushing soil from her hands, and turned to see Victor dismounting, his face a mask of cold fury. Unlike his previous visits, he wore no pretense of civility, no mask of the respectable banker. "You've humiliated me for the last time," he said without preamble. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation? My position?" Vivian stood her ground, refusing to show fear though her heart pounded. "I did what was necessary to protect myself, Victor, something I should have done years ago." He laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Protect yourself. From what? A husband who provided for you, who gave you a position in society, who tolerated your numerous shortcomings. A husband who beat me when dinner was late, Vivian replied steadily. Who controlled every aspect of my life, who treated me as property rather than a person. Victor's expression darkened further. You were mine, mine to do with as I pleased, and you still would be if not for that cowboy who filled your head with nonsense. He took a menacing step forward. Where is he now, your protector? Gone, it seems, leaving you alone, vulnerable. Vivian backed away, calculating the distance to her cabin where she kept a rifle Xavier had taught her to use. Xavier will be back soon, as will Jim and Billy. You should leave, Victor, before they return. I'm not leaving without settling this, Victor snarled, lunging forward suddenly and grabbing her arm. You're coming with me, divorce or no divorce. I'll show everyone what happens to wives who think they can escape their husbands. Vivian struggled, but Victor's grip was iron, his fingers digging into her flesh with bruising force. Let me go, she demanded, trying to break free. Never, Victor hissed. He began dragging her toward his horse, his intention clear. To take her away from the ranch, away from the protection Xavier and the community had provided. Vivian fought harder, her newfound strength evident as she twisted and kicked, managing to break his grip momentarily. She ran toward the cabin, but Victor pursued, catching her before she could reach the door. Stop fighting me, he shouted, grabbing her by the hair and yanking her back. The pain was sharp, immediate, but it sparked not fear but anger in Vivian, years of suppressed rage finally breaking free. She whirled, her fist connecting solidly with Victor's jaw in a punch Xavier had taught her, just in case. Victor staggered back, shocked by the unexpected resistance. Before he could recover, Vivian darted for the cabin door, reaching it and rushing inside. She grabbed the rifle from its place by the door, turning to face Victor as he appeared in the doorway. Get out, she commanded, the rifle steady in her hands. I won't let you hurt me again. Victor hesitated, clearly not having anticipated armed resistance from the woman he had dominated for years. But his anger overrode his caution. You won't shoot me, he sneered. You don't have the courage. I survived you, Victor, Vivian replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. That took more courage than you'll ever know. Victor took another step forward, and Vivian raised the rifle to her shoulder, aiming at a spot just above his head. She fired, the shot deafening in the small cabin, splintering the doorframe inches from Victor's ear. He froze, finally recognizing the danger he was in. You're insane, he breathed. Completely lost your mind. No, came a voice from behind him. She's found herself. Xavier stood in the yard, his own rifle trained on Victor's back. Jim and Billy flanked him, similarly armed. All three had clearly ridden hard to reach the cabin, alerted by the sound of the gunshot. Step away from the door, Keller, Xavier ordered, his voice cold with controlled fury. Now, Victor had no choice but to comply, backing out of the cabin with his hands raised. This is between me and my wife, he began. Ex-wife, Xavier corrected sharply. And anything that threatens her is between you and me. Sheriff Mills arrived moments later, having also heard the shot while on his regular patrol of the area. He took in the scene quickly, Victor with his hands up, surrounded by armed men, Vivian in the cabin doorway, rifle still in her hands, a bruise forming on her arm where Victor had grabbed her. Mr. Keller, the sheriff said grimly, I believe I'll be placing you under arrest for assault and attempted kidnapping. Victor's face contorted with rage. This is absurd. She's the one who shot at me. After you attacked her on her own property, Xavier pointed out. Multiple witnesses saw you dragging her by the arm and hair. Self-defense seems clear enough to me." The sheriff handcuffed Victor despite his protests, reading him his rights with grim satisfaction. "Been waiting for you to make a mistake like this, Keller," he admitted. "Gives me legal grounds to ensure you don't bother Miss Keller again." As the sheriff led Victor away, the banker turned to fix Vivian with one last venomous glare. "This isn't over," he threatened. But Vivian, standing tall in the doorway of her cabin, knew that it was. The fear that had ruled her life for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet strength that would never again be broken by Victor Keller's cruelty. Xavier was at her side in an instant, checking her for injuries, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" "I heard the shot and thought, I'm fine," Vivian assured him, setting the rifle aside to touch his face gently. "Really, just a few bruises." Xavier's expression was a mixture of pride and lingering worry. "You faced him down, alone." "Not alone," Vivian corrected. "I knew you would come. And even if you hadn't arrived when you did, I could have handled Victor." She smiled slightly. "You taught me well." Xavier pulled her into a fierce embrace, holding her as if afraid she might disappear. "When I heard that shot, I aimed over his head," Vivian explained against his shoulder. "Just wanted to make him think twice." Xavier chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. "Remind me never to underestimate you, Vivian Keller." She pulled back slightly to look up at him. "Actually," she said, "I've been thinking it might be time for a new name, one that was never his." Understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes. "Does this mean?" Vivian nodded, smiling through tears that were now of joy, not fear. "I believe you made me a promise at Christmas, if that offer still stands." Xavier didn't let her finish. He kissed her with all the passion and love he had restrained for so long, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Xavier touched his forehead to hers. "I think Mrs. Young has a nice ring to it, don't you?" "The nicest," Vivian agreed, her heart full to bursting. They were married in June, when the valley was lush with new growth and wildflowers covered the hillsides. The ceremony took place on the ranch, beneath an arch of roses that Vivian had planted and tended. The entire community of Cedar Creek turned out for the occasion, along with Zachary and several of the cowboys from the cattle drive, who had helped Vivian begin her journey to freedom. Sheriff Mills delivered the final piece of good news. Victor Keller had been convicted of assault and attempted kidnapping, sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. Upon his release, he would be forbidden from ever contacting Vivian again. "You won't have to worry about him anymore," the sheriff assured them. "Some men can't accept losing what they see as their property, but he won't have a choice now." The knowledge that Victor was truly out of her life lifted the last shadow from Vivian's happiness. She stood beside Xavier as they exchanged vows, her heart light with the certainty that this marriage, unlike her first, was founded on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and deep love. "I promise to cherish your independence even as we build a life together," Xavier vowed, his voice steady with conviction. "To support your dreams as my own, to keep watch over your happiness as I did that first night in the woods." Vivian's eyes filled with tears at the reference to their beginning. "And I promise to trust in our love even when life brings challenges," she responded. "To stand beside you as your equal, to never forget that true strength comes not from domination, but from lifting each other up." Their kiss, sealing these promises, was witnessed by all who had played a part in their journey from the terrifying night when Vivian had fled into the woods, to this moment of perfect joy when she walked confidently into a future of her own choosing. Epilogue, 5 years later. "Mama, look. I found another one." Vivian Young looked up from her garden to see her 4-year-old son, Thomas, racing toward her, clutching a wildflower in his small hand. His dark hair, so like his father's, flopped over eyes that matched her own as he skidded to a stop beside her. "It's beautiful," Vivian said, accepting the slightly crushed bloom with appropriate reverence. "Just what my garden needed." Thomas beamed, always eager to help with what he called Mama's growing things. Behind him, 2-year-old Elizabeth toddled determinedly across the yard, supervised by Jim, whose aging bones had led him to take on more childcare and less ranch work in recent years. "Lizzie found a bug," Thomas reported importantly, "but she didn't eat it this time." Vivian laughed, remembering the incident that had so horrified Xavier and amused her. "Well, that's progress," she said, ruffling her son's hair. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the trail leading from the north pasture. Xavier rode into view, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, still sitting a horse with the same easy grace that had first impressed her years ago. "Papa!" Thomas shouted, racing toward his father as Xavier dismounted. Xavier caught his son up in one arm, swinging him around before setting him on the saddle. "How's my cowboy?" he asked, his face lighting with the smile he reserved for his family. "I helped Mama with the garden," Thomas announced proudly, "and kept Lizzie from eating bugs." "A full day's work, then," Xavier said seriously, though his eyes danced with amusement as they met Vivian's. He crossed to where she stood, leaning down to kiss her with a tenderness that had only deepened over their years together. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, his hand resting lightly on the gentle swell of her stomach, just beginning to show with their third child. "Wonderful," Vivian replied truthfully. This pregnancy, like her others, had been easy compared to the trials some women endured. The morning sickness is finally gone. Xavier's relief was evident. Though he tried to hide it, he worried over her with each pregnancy, haunted perhaps by the memory of his own mother's death in childbirth. "Good," he said simply, his thumb brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "You're beautiful, you know that." Vivian smiled, still warmed by his compliments after all these years. "You're biased," she teased. "Absolutely," he agreed without hesitation. The young ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Xavier's practical knowledge of cattle and land combined with Vivian's head for business had allowed them to expand, buying adjacent properties as they became available. The modest spread Xavier had inherited from his father now employed half a dozen hands year-round, with more during busy seasons. The original cabin where Vivian had first stayed was now a guest house for visiting friends, while the main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Vivian's garden had become a source of pride for the entire community, producing not just vegetables for their table but flowers and medicinal herbs that she shared with neighbors in need. Their marriage, founded on mutual respect and genuine partnership, had become something of a model in the community. Young women often sought Vivian's advice, while Xavier's reputation as a man who valued his wife's contributions had led other ranchers to reconsider their own marriages. The story of how they had met her running from an abusive husband, him offering protection with those simple words, "I'll keep watch," had become something of a legend in Cedar Creek. Embellished in the retelling, it nevertheless captured the essence of their beginning: courage in the face of danger, kindness offered without expectation, love growing from the fertile soil of respect. As the family gathered for dinner that evening, with Thomas chattering about his adventures, Elizabeth attempting to feed her potatoes to the dog under the table, and Xavier catching Vivian's eye with a private smile, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The terrified woman who had fled into the woods outside Provo seemed almost a different person now, so fragile, so unsure of her own worth. The path from that night to this moment had not been easy or straight. There had been legal battles, nightmares that sometimes still disturbed her sleep, moments of doubt and fear. But there had also been joy beyond measure. The day Xavier had first said he loved her, their wedding under the rose arch, the birth of their children, and countless small moments of happiness that added up to a life richer than she had ever dared hope for. Later, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into night's quiet, Vivian and Xavier sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the stars emerge above the valley. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "About how far we've come," Vivian replied. "About the night we met, how afraid I was, how you kept your promise to keep watch." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "Best promise I ever made," he said softly. "Led to everything good in my life." Vivian looked up at him, this man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it existed. "I love you, Xavier Young," she said simply. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." Xavier's kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of all they had built together. "And I love you, Vivian Young. Always have, always will." As they sat together under the vast Colorado sky, Vivian felt the completeness of her journey from a woman hiding in fear to one who had found not just safety but joy, not just escape but belonging. The woods of her past had given way to the open spaces of her present, where love grew as naturally and beautifully as the wildflowers on the hillside. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had created together, Vivian knew with absolute certainty that some promises, once made and kept, could change everything forever.